Hi, everybody. Happy Friday afternoon. It's another live edition of the Green Rush on Pro Cannabis Media. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media, and who am I joined by as my co host today?
David Rabinovitz. I'm glad to be here once again, Jimmy.
And we're also so happy it is the third Friday of the month, and that means we welcome in Morgan Fox, who is the communications director of the NCIA, one of the lead lobbyist groups in Washington, D.C. Morgan, how are you, and how is Washington, D.C.? Did you guys get snow down there?
I guess you could call it that. We got a couple of inches and everything shut down as usual.
That's typical of Washington, D.C. I know that. Meanwhile, I think it's been snowing 36 hours in the Massachusetts, Boston area right now. And people are just going about their thing. It isn't that big a deal. It's one of those snowstorms, but we obviously want to drive safe out there. Today's program is going to be focused on the economics of cultivation, and we do have a great lineup for everybody. But since Morgan is with us, and it's been a very interesting week down in Washington, D.C., for not just the NCIA, but for a whole bunch of other lobbyist groups out there, like the Minority Cannabis Business Association, like NORML. All of you guys got together, wrote a letter to President Joe Biden asking for the expungement of all cannabis possession criminals. How did all that come about?
Well, really, Justin Streekel at NORML took the lead on that and had been putting something like that together for a couple of months. And it was finally able to culminate in that letter, which was not only signed by a number of advocacy and industry groups, but also by 37 members of Congress, urging President Biden to basically pardon all nonviolent federal cannabis offenders and commute the sentences of anybody that was still incarcerated for such convictions.
And this actually an executive order pardoning a group of people is not unique. I believe it was done for the during the Vietnam War too, for people who opted out as conscientious objectors, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, you weren't alive then. I was, and David was, but that I'm pretty sure that's not the first time it happened.
I think it was really only like 3 years before I was born, but yes, President Carter did pardon all people who avoided the draft. I believe Gerald Ford did something relatively similar as well, sort of related to the Selective Service program. And I think that it's also been done in antiquity too. Perhaps I think it was directly after the Civil War. Everybody that was a member of the Confederacy received a pardon. Not exactly the best comparison, considering we're trying to do the exact opposite of what those guys were fighting for. But it's not unheard of, and it's one thing that the Biden administration could do to live up to its stated promise of real criminal justice reform, particularly in the area of drug policy.
Absolutely. David, you got something for him?
Oh no, Jimmy. In this part of it, I prefer to listen.
All right, fair enough. That's cool. Morgan, you were actually well, let's go back to the last section about the Civil War, because it's an interesting comparison to what is going on in America today. Unfortunately, it does seem like some people are actually clinging to that division in this country for whatever reasons. And I think it's been established that the persons of color tend to get arrested a lot more than those who use cannabis as white people, so that the actual cannabis issue has become aligned with the race issue. Is that how lobbyists portray this when they go and sit and talk with members of Congress?
It's an issue that our team consistently brings up with every meeting that we have. The prohibition of cannabis began as a way to oppress racial minorities, and the restarting of it in the 70s with the Controlled Substances Act was just another step in that direction. And in the last couple of years, tapes have come out showing that Richard Nixon specifically employed prohibition policies in order to criminalize racial minorities and people that he disagreed with politically, namely the anti-war contingent that was growing in power at the time. So it's impossible to extricate issues of racial justice from prohibition and from cannabis policy. And this is definitely a step in the right direction that the administration could take. There are some other things that the administration could do unilaterally through executive action that would help us move further in the right direction while Congress is working on comprehensive cannabis policy reform that has robust restorative justice provisions in it. One of those things would be reinstating the Cole memo. Another would be directing the VA to allow their doctors to be able to recommend medical cannabis in states where it's legal. And I think a big one would be changing immigration policy so that cannabis would no longer be a trigger for deportation. It would no longer be a factor in citizenship approval, and it would no longer be a factor in traveling to the United States, because we've seen that cannabis arrests are consistently in the top 5 reasons that deportation proceedings are triggered. It's considered a mark of low moral character if you're applying for citizenship. And as we've seen over the last couple of years, people that are involved in the legal cannabis industry in places like Canada, Israel, and throughout the EU and throughout Latin America have been banned permanently from traveling to the United States if it's discovered that they're traveling here for the purposes of legal cannabis industry work.
That's crazy. And here's another stat that I heard over the last 24 to 48 hours. And David, you have your ears and your eyes on the state of New Jersey. I heard from someone from New Jersey yesterday, while the governor continues, I don't think, I've been checking the wires, as they used to say back in the day, and nothing has come across as far as New Jersey's governor writing and signing the bill into law. But even since November, since New Jersey voters voted for legalization of cannabis, there have been 6,000 cannabis possession arrests that their own DA in the state says we're not going to prosecute them. I mean, I don't get it. I'm sorry, I just don't get it. I get very frustrated.
It's frankly mind-boggling, and that actually seems like the rate is a little bit higher than normal. On average, New Jersey arrests around 13,000 people for cannabis possession or consumption every year. And so, I mean, if you're just looking at the math month by month, that's actually an increase in the number of arrests. So I'm not sure whether that is that law enforcement is being overzealous and trying to arrest as many people as possible while they still can, or whether people are confused about the fact that it's not quite legal yet and are being a little bit more brazen.
David, you might know the answer to this question. Do law enforcement officers have like car salesmen, they have a quota to make every month? Do they have to make a certain amount? Do you know if they have to make a certain amount of arrests every month? David?
Well, I know that a lot
go ahead, Morgan. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
A lot of them do have quotas, and some departments are based on specific types of arrests, and some of them are just a raw arrest number, regardless of the charge. But that's not really as much of an issue as the financial incentives that law enforcement has for continuing to keep cannabis illegal, primarily in the form of asset forfeiture and things like burn grants that are basically federal grant money that's available to local police departments that is based entirely on both the number and raw amount of drug seizures.
Right. Yeah, the federal government has a lot of influence in those areas through community-based programs. I have a cousin who was a prosecutor and would put programs together in East Boston many years ago because they were getting federal money if they got the right program submitted.
Yeah, and this sort of thing exists everywhere, and it's one of the reasons that law enforcement associations typically are the biggest opponents of legalization initiatives and legislation in every single state.
And yet I think the tide is turning. And while they may be a group, and in general that may be true, I've heard some very articulate cases by law enforcement now that it has become legalized. I'm remembering, David, you remember this. Remember the cop in Maine? I think it was the Bangor, Maine Police Department was posting on Facebook or something, and it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek post.
Oh yeah, that was yes. I do remember that.
I knew you'd remember that. And I'm glad that I can't remember the details, but I remember it happened.
Jimmy, before we move on, Morgan, what do you think the odds are that that you're going to be successful in trying to move the Biden administration to do something quickly?
Well, I don't know about quickly, but things are definitely moving in the right direction. The appointees that we've seen to major federal agencies have so far been at least not negative or problematic in terms of cannabis policy. Some of them are kind of gray areas, but overall, we've seen nothing that is really raising any sort of alarm bells or anything like that. In terms of getting immediate action, clearly the administration has a lot of issues on its plate right now, and cannabis policy might not be the number one issue for the administration, but because this is so heavily related to criminal justice reform that the president has been touting throughout his campaign, I think that it's very likely that it's at least going to get some consideration in the near future. I'm sure that there are people talking about it right now based on that letter. And whether or not we see immediate action, I think remains to be seen. But I think that at the very least, it's elevating the conversation within the administration, and certainly Congress is doing its part with that, both with signing on to this letter and prioritizing comprehensive cannabis policy reform in the Senate and in a lot of the appointment hearings that have been going on. Particularly, Senator Booker has been just a rock star in bringing this issue and the racial and social justice aspects of fighting prohibition front and center in every single opportunity that he has.
Yep. Have you followed totally unrelated, but it ties in a little bit? Have you followed the issue that's going on in DC about the student loan forgiveness?
Not particularly. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, so Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren would like to see the government forgive the first $50,000 of student debt for everybody across the board. The Biden administration, as I understand it, came back and said, well, that's too much money and we don't want to do it across the board. We're not forgiving debt for people who went to Harvard and Yale. Kind of makes sense, right? People who go to Harvard and Yale hopefully can afford to pay their debt back. But what I found was interesting, this past week, there was a story that Biden had reached out to the Justice Department to ask them about the legality of actually forgiving $50,000 a person. And how I see that ties into marijuana is Biden was adamant, we're not doing that. And within 2 weeks, there's a story that he's already asking about, could we do it or how could we do it? And I'm looking at that as a promise that while he was not really that, he was the worst candidate on the Democratic side for marijuana reform, at least from what I saw. I think he could soften up very quickly on that.
Well, I think that that's absolutely true. And the president has shown that he is able to evolve and be flexible on this issue. And the more people that he talks to within his own administration, as well as in Congress, I think the better he's going to get across the board when it comes to cannabis. There's actually another interesting tie-in with the student loan issue that I really just thought of, that in a lot of states, if you are, and actually it used to be a federal rule up until just a short number of years ago, that if you were arrested for cannabis, you were ineligible for federal student aid. And that meant that you were forced to take out private student loans. I'm actually a perfect example of that. My high school cannabis arrest invalidated me for federal student aid, and I had to take out tens of thousands of dollars in private student loans in order to pay for college that have been hanging over my head for decades now. And that is something that I think really ties directly into cannabis, that people who have been arrested for cannabis, even if you don't go to jail, there are so many collateral consequences. And up until a few years ago, the inability to access federal student aid was one of them. And that basically put, tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people over the years into massive amounts of debt, most of the time for getting caught with a joint.
Thank you for sharing that personal note about your background, Morgan. I'll admit, I did not know that. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a suburb of Cleveland.
Okay. Wow. And that obviously has been with you for quite a while, and it would be nice if the president would expunge that for you, right?
Well, I mean, my charges wouldn't get expunged because they were based on state law, and that's where the vast majority of cannabis arrests take place. So really, there are a very, very small number of actual federal cannabis convictions, but at the very least, it would help those individuals, and it would also send a clear message to Congress and to the American people that the Biden administration is serious about criminal justice reform and, in particular, cannabis policy reform.
Yeah. It's actually what when we talked to Michael Correa, your lead lobbyist last week, he talked about how it's going to be a social justice reform driven bill that moves the cannabis cause forward, which I thought, by the way, great interview with Michael. The guy knows how to talk, doesn't he?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why he's the guy that talks to Congress.
Yeah, I think it's great. I really have enjoyed getting to know him, and I appreciate as much time as you've been able to give us too. Yeah, you were quoted recently in an article by Leafly that David Downs wrote about the vape testing failures at some state levels that already have legal state programs for adult use cannabis. We all remember the vape crisis. It was exposed by Leafly that it was a vitamin E acetate and it was more on the illegal market than the legal market. Would you like to see better testing in legal states? And again, you're a federal guy. I know it's a state federal thing, but the question of making sure that the products that are in the legal medical dispensaries are tested and not just for what's in the cartridge, but for emissions tests so that when you exhale, it's what's coming out of your lungs that is tested. And that's what Europe uses. And I believe other countries look at that as well. Is that something you'd like to see as part of this national reform?
Well, the emissions testing is actually testing what goes into your lungs as opposed to what comes out of it. But minor detail.
That's a pretty big detail, and I apologize for that. I thought that they were testing the emissions, what was being exhaled. Interesting.
It's what the cartridge emits, not what your lungs emit.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. But
okay.
So I mean, it's just a technicality, but the idea is there, and that's what we have been promoting since we released a vape safety paper right around the time that the E-Valley outbreak was occurring. That's what industry experts and a lot of the people on NCI's committees are really promoting right now, and what some companies are actually doing on their own, even though the fact their individual states don't require it. Colorado is actually going to be the first state to require it. And I mean, I just want to preface this by saying that the states have been doing an excellent job at keeping unsafe products out of the consumer market. But there's no reason why they should not be using emissions testing when the industry and scientific experts are all saying the same thing, that emissions testing is the best way to not only determine if there are any unhealthy or potentially dangerous compounds in the cannabinoid mixture or concentrates themselves, but also within the actual devices that they're being that are being filled with these concentrates. And some of these products do emit heavy metals and can create byproducts that are very dangerous to people. So emissions testing is just the simplest and most effective way to determine whether or not a product is safe for consumers. And that also helps people in the business, because if they know that the people that are manufacturing their empty vape cartridges are using shoddy techniques or using dangerous heavy metals, they can switch suppliers. There's absolutely no reason for states not to start instituting this, and they simply haven't, despite the fact that they've been had a really good track record. There's also a problem that a lot of labs aren't prepared to be able to do that sort of testing. But despite the fact that NCI mostly works at the federal level, we want states to be doing this, because right now there's no federal regulation. And until we pass a comprehensive cannabis policy reform bill for descheduling that includes a robust regulatory structure, and then the organizations and agencies that are in charge of that regulatory structure actually lay out what the regulations will be, it's incumbent upon the states to make sure that consumers and businesses are protected.
Absolutely. And I'm going to give Leafly another plug here. They had their annual jobs report in the cannabis industry, and I'm pretty sure that I think the number was 321,000 employed inside the cannabis industry, which is now more than electrical engineers, EMTs, and for some reason they threw dentists in there. But how rewarding is that for you as someone who's actually seen this industry grow from a few thousand employees to hundreds of thousands?
I mean, it's honestly mind-blowing, and I think it should send a strong signal to members of Congress as well as to state governments that this is an industry that could contribute a lot to the economic recovery post-pandemic, as well as creating a robust employment and economic sector in perpetuity. It's just absolutely wonderful to see how many people are benefiting from this in just such a short period of time that we've actually been seeing real reforms at the state level. I think it's important to point out that one of the things that was noticed in that was that because each state has its own basically siloed market, that a lot of these jobs are unnecessarily duplicative. So there might not be the necessity for that many roles with each individual company. However, when you finally change federal law and more states start to get on board, even if some companies are able to operate with fewer staff, the fact that there will be so many more markets and so many more businesses opening up after federal legalization means that we're not going to see any contraction of that number. It's only going to grow.
Fantastic. Morgan Fox, what a pleasure. It was so great to talk with you again. Thank you again. I'm going to look forward to the third Friday in March now. Is that cool?
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me. I really appreciate it.
You bet. That's
Good to see
Morgan
you again,
Fox,
Morgan.
the communication director of the NCIA, on our Green Rush live show here on Fridays. And it's Friday, and it's closing in on 4:20. In fact, I'm sure a few of your clocks have already passed that 4:20 mark. So I definitely want to take a little break. Let's set up the fact that the Waldos from the San Rafael, California area are the ones that actually got this 420 thing going. And law enforcement used to use that call to explain public consumption of cannabis going on. And my version of 420, which does coincide with 1971 when the Waldos started this whole thing, was a song by Jonathan Edwards called Shanty. And for every Friday at 420, we salute the whole community of the cannabis industry, the whole cannabis culture, if you will. Sit back, enjoy Jonathan Edwards singing Shanty, and we'll be back with more of our economics of cultivation on the Green Rush after this.
Yeah, this is a tune that I wrote back in 19... I've forgotten. We had a saying in our old band, one of my first bands in 1966 or so. What are you going to do tonight? Oh, just, like every other night, just going to lay around the shanty and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down in the kitchen, fix me something good to eat. Make my head a little high, make the whole day complete. Gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. Pass it to me, baby, pass it to me slow. We'll take time out to smile a little before you let her go. We're gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. You're on something. Go ahead. Rick Brodsky, everybody. Nothing to do and there's always room for more. Fill it, light it, shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works, it's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard, it's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. I'm gonna sit down in my rented car. I'm gonna jam it into drive. Gonna head on out and play at WSCA with Sean. I'm glad I'm alive. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on every night and day. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
Nice. It's Friday. Thank God. Thank God Jonathan Edwards is joining us live in the WSCA studios.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Green Rush on Friday afternoon, our live stream talk show about the world of cannabis. In this case, The Green Rush is focused on the business of cannabis. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. I'm joined every Friday by my friend David Rabinovitz. David, say hello.
Hello.
Good job, David. I feel like I could have a ventriloquist kind of a thing. You go, okay, David, say hello, David. Anyway, we're very happy to be talking about the economics of cultivation with two guys. One is Ryan Cohen. He is the founder of Top Shelf Connoisseurs, and he is from Massachusetts. And the other is Josh Harden. He's with Southern Grown LLC out of Little Rock, Arkansas. And we'll start with the Little Rock, Arkansas gentlemen, just because, you know, at weddings, you go home with the centerpiece if you come from the furthest to get it. So we're going to give you the opportunity, Josh. First of all, how do you grow cannabis in Little Rock, Arkansas, especially with a foot of snow outside your door?
Well, let's start. Thanks for having me. And I'll say, right now, all my cannabis is in Cali, Colombia. That's where I do, the majority of my work. So, I have a good strategy for this time of year, right? I'm home right now, but I spend most of my winter working in Cali, Colombia for the government of the Valle de Cauca. So working directly with the government to kind of keep farmers moving towards the market, and everybody wants to know how to get to the market. It's part of the discussion with economics today, or a big part of that. How do we get to the market discussion? And that's kind of what's taken me to South America, was where is this going to be produced at in January and February in the U.S.? Well, Colombia, we've just planted a crop about 3 weeks ago and harvesting other crops, and so it never really stops down on the equator. So.
And that, of course, is a great question to ask someone from the Northeast, because they don't have the type of weather that Colombia has. So, Ryan, how challenging is it to grow cannabis indoor, or can you actually control it better when you're in a controlled environment?
Thanks for having me on today, Jimmy. Yes, I would say that, having an indoor availability up here in Massachusetts, as opposed to probably year round around the equator, it's a lot easier to control the variables. The cost to produce is a lot higher in accordance with that, with the HVAC and the cooling and the dehumidification that it takes to grow indoors. So fortunately, we're able to get 5+ harvests a year indoor, and unfortunately, even in the best climates here in the States, you're really pushing 3 if you're lucky. And I think that's one good advantage, indoor versus outdoor. Obviously, the cost to produce is higher, but I think you can control the variables a lot easier and put out great product year round.
David, the economics of cultivation was your idea. So I'm
Sure.
going to allow you to jump in
Sure.
here and take over and talk to your two guests. Go ahead.
That's great. Thank you, Jimmy. So Ryan, walk us through where's your company in what stage is your company in? Are you licensed yet, operational? And
So,
tell us
the-
a little bit about what the journey's been.
Sure. So we started Top Shelf Canosaurs in December 2018, which seems like a lifetime ago. And
Two lifetimes ago.
yes. So here in Massachusetts, it's a very arduous process to get to license. There's high cost of real estate. There's a lack of real estate in the M zone. And then there's a lot of bureaucracy that you have to deal with on the municipal level. The reason this has taken me so long, we're at the provisional stage, is just because it takes a lot of money and a lot of time to get there. And I think with our budget, we did a really good job. We had to pivot and move from Hudson, Massachusetts to Uxbridge, Massachusetts, where we're at now. We got a much bigger building and a better situation. So I think just taking your lumps and keeping on has really been important for us.
So, if you don't mind sharing, Ryan, what did it cost to get to a provisional license?
So we got our provisional in July of 2019, which also seems like a lifetime ago. But it took us about 200,000 to 300,000, and that was a lot of bootstrapping and a lot of sweat equity. I've heard upwards of $1 million or more to get to that same provisional. So, we took a lot of pride in the fact that we did a lot of it ourselves, and we learned a lot of lessons along the way.
So
Did you learn from
let's assume
Caroline
you
from
had somebody
Uxbridge?
else here who
She
was
knows her
actually
stuff.
starting.
Sorry.
What tips would you give them, like on the lessons you've learned?
I would say building a great team, establishing strong SOPs for when you are operational is really going to drive your hires. You can have the best hires with the worst SOPs, and you're just not going to get where you want to get. So I think spending money on that IP is really important. I would also say that be realistic with your time and your Gantt chart. We thought this thing was going to take months, and it's just embarrassing to say that it keeps getting bumped out and out and out. So really build in extra money and extra time when you're putting your conceptual budget and your Gantt chart together, and just be realistic with what this is going to cost, because it always costs more than you think. So
And for the audience members who don't know what a Gantt chart is, can you explain that to them?
so a Gantt chart is kind of like an organic chart that shows your accomplishments and shows visually kind of how long each task has taken. Initially, we thought everything would take a year, and so that piece of information was not helpful. And I've learned for the next time just to really build in extra time, especially things that are beyond your control, like municipal approval. We got held up in land court for 4 months. That obviously wasn't on our Gantt chart. So I could write a book on the trials and tribulations it's taken to get us this far. I also wanted to add, Dave, that since we started Top Shelf Canosaurs, I've also started a manufacturing company called TSC Labs and a home delivery direct-to-consumer company called TSC Delivery. So I've been busy starting all three entities and happy to get started.
What was the biggest cash drain for you?
Honestly, holding costs. We had a pretty favorable lease in Hudson that wasn't so draining. And once we got up to a bigger building, I mean, it's our burn rate right now is just astronomical. So it's really starting to catch up to us. The 200 or 300 or so we took us to get to July 2019 has doubled or almost tripled since then with holding costs.
And with real estate being the biggest, the hold fees for the real estate being the biggest cost.
Exactly.
So if you were giving advice to somebody in the audience about how to approach the real estate, what would you tell them?
I think if you look hard enough, first of all, you want to pick a town that's not going to fight you. They're going to help you. I will say that Uxbridge has been really amazing in helping us in our journey. So pick the right town and make sure when you meet your landlord that he understands the situation. You also don't want to sign a lease that's not contingent. Many people think they're a shoo-in to get a license, and it just doesn't happen for a reason, and you're on the hook and you might be in court paying rent for the next 10 years. So I think realize what a place is worth. Don't get squeezed too much. The cannabis tax up here in Massachusetts is alive and well, and I think people are paying through the teeth and ultimately it's not a good decision in the end, because their cost to produce is really affected by that deal you sign when you're in that honeymoon phase.
Right.
The
So,
question
Josh,
I got to ask, David, I'm going to jump in
Josh,
here.
tell us a little bit about
No, I'm
Southern
not.
Grown and what you do. I'm sorry, Jimmy. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Ryan, with all the regulations and all the taxes and everything, can you still make money in the cannabis business growing commercial grade weed?
Thankfully, you can, Jimmy. The benchmark pricing right now for wholesale is pretty outstanding. Josh, I'm not sure if you're privy, but right now a prepackaged pound of AAA, out of this world cannabis is going for right in the mid fours right now. So about 42 to 4,600 for the best you can get. And the numbers look pretty good after that, Jimmy. The question is, how long will this phase be going? Because, if you look at other mature markets, the price comes down pretty precipitously once more operators come online. And I think you'll see in this year into next that those benchmark prices will go down from the mid fours, at least to the mid threes. So that's when the cost to produce becomes more important, because anyone can make money at 4,200 a pound. The question is, can you make money at 22, which is where you have in the Pacific Northwest? So I think automation, you might have to pay a little bit more in the CapEx in the beginning, but I think if you keep your cost to produce in mind in the beginning, I think you really can make money.
There you go. Have you seen Jim Belushi's show, Growing Belushi?
Yes.
Did
Yeah,
you
those
enjoy it?
guys are wild. I can't, you talk about racking systems to go high, vertical. Those
Yep.
guys, I think, are 5 or 6 high. And I just can't imagine the OSHA issues those guys have to deal with to put those guys on scissor lifts like that. It's outstanding.
Cool. And then, by the way, I don't know if you saw it or not, Josh, but they did visit Medellin, Colombia, in that show,
No, I haven't seen
Growing
that one.
Belushi. And I last time I checked, that was in Colombia, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I haven't seen that episode though. I'll check that out. Yeah.
You'll enjoy it. It's only 3 episodes, and he's a riot. They did a nice job of embellishing to make it a little entertaining. Let's just say, great character development, and I think he was trying to sell his pounds for 800 in Oregon, right? Isn't that what he got for his pound or something? I think that's what it was.
I think I would say 800 to 1,000 in the most mature markets.
Wow.
And that's really a cost to produce right there. I mean, if you're doing it indoor, good luck. You might need some help with solar because if it's 800 wholesale, I mean, there's really not much left over.
Josh, can you walk us through what it's like to grow cannabis in Colombia, please? Because back in the day, let's just say I was a big supporter.
Right. Well, and let me tell you it's something I'll really echo something Ryan said, because I've dealt with the same issue in Colombia. I've been down there almost 4 years, and it's just all regulatory, work. Everything nobody put into their budgets. Really, if you looked at pro formas from 2017, they were all going to be in private jets, flying around the world by now, and multi-billionaires, but the reality is we haven't really exported the first, 100 kilos of oil out of the country yet. And so we're just so buried in bureaucracy and just very slow, paperwork that just never ends, just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of from different departments, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Agriculture. Every ministry has kind of their own piece. And so it's just been years and a lot of money, and all the companies that I've worked with, some of them I've just had to leave the country because it's just easier to go to Ecuador, or easier to go to Brazil, or there's other countries. Mexico's coming online. You know, we've got a lot of countries in Latin America that are primed to produce a lot of product. It's just logistics, right? It's not, I don't think that it's a threat to the Massachusetts, you know, high-end cannabis market. What I think I see is more focused on end products and topicals and creams and different types of products like that that can be mass produced, along with just, you know, big scale here within the next 6 to 8 months, dry flower. And so that's a big move to where we can export raw product to extractors and to different people around the country. So that's really what Southern Grown does. We're trying to really facilitate the farmers getting into those markets, and how do you sell into an international, you know, chain of buyers. And if Walgreens wants to buy CBD full spectrum product from Colombia, how do they do that, you know, and how do they communicate? So we're kind of building the pipeline with the governments and private agencies and lots of different strategic partners to kind of oil all the pieces of this giant export import, you know, CBD THC market. And part of that's just cost, you know, getting these costs down has been a huge part of our work. And really everybody comes into Latin America thinking everything is cheap. And sure, fertilizer is cheap, but, you know, there's a lot of other things that aren't cheap. The attorneys aren't cheap. The accountants aren't cheap. And there's a lot of other things that maybe you didn't put into your, you know, your prospectus or your really nice pro forma. You didn't expect, you know, legal battles that would turn into a year of fighting, you know, with local municipalities or, you know, different land laws. And that's the same in the US as it is in Colombia. There are things universal you don't know till you start to unwind the yarn, and you've always got to have cushion in your budget. I've found that when I'm skating on the edge of my budget, I'm always one step from disaster when there's not, you know, an extra $10,000 or $20,000 there to cushion what's happening. If you don't have cash on hand while you're building and moving an operation into full capacity, you're in trouble, because anything can happen. And, you know, the local guy comes down, the local zoning commissioner or any of these people can make your life and your budget an absolute nightmare. And they have mine. I mean, they've extended my project dates years sometimes, you know, just by showing up and declaring, you know, something not right, or losing a license over, you know, I've lost licenses to different non-compliances, and it's just taught me big lessons, because we've lost years, and I mean literally hundreds of thousands of dollars of money, because we didn't have compliance and we didn't have all of that prepared and in our budget from day one. We weren't ready for it.
David?
Okay. So Josh, is most of your business down in Colombia, or do you also operate up here in the States?
Sure, we work here. We just signed a deal with Green Grow out of California. You know, we're going to work with them to lay out some certified organic production. I think organic is a big part of what we're moving towards. You know, with THC, it's a little harder to get some of these certifications, but with CBD, we see just an overwhelming demand for GAP certification, which is Good Ag Practices, and organic certification, to really put kind of a brand, you know, standard, so that, you know, you can send it to Australia or Europe or Canada or Mexico or wherever you need to go.
So that leads me into another question. I talk to a lot of growers, and my belief is, at least up here in Massachusetts, something Ryan kind of touched upon, prices are going to come down. And when the feds either decriminalize or legalize, we're going to have interstate transport, which means we're going to have to compete with marijuana that's grown in really low cost areas like the West Coast, or potentially internationally. And then one of the common retorts I'll hear is, yeah, but you can't grow really good weed outside. The only way you're going to get really good product is growing it indoors. What do you think about that?
You know, I think I would. Here's my argument: is if we find the right balance, you know, we still have to grow. In Colombia, we're focused on growing in the soil, but under cover, you know, under plastic with you know the right microclimates. We grow in over 15 different areas of Colombia where the microclimates are perfect, and we're talking 81 degrees, 82 degrees, and 40 to 50% humidity year round, 365 days a year. And so all we need is a little bit of light. We add just a little bit of, you know, LED lighting, nothing big. We don't use sodium lights or anything like that, but just with supplemental lighting, we harvest 4 times a year. And, you know, we're anywhere between 4 cents to 12 cents a gram is what our operating costs are. And so, you know, we're able to sell, you know, in South America, you know, the average cannabis sells for $2 a gram, black market, you know, in Bogota, Colombia. I was just looking this up, and it's one of the cheapest prices, you know, around. And it's just because it's just grows so easily. But now getting higher quality and better, you know, strains and genetics means more work, more cost, all of those things. But because we can harvest 4 times a year with, you know, very little electricity, very little utility cost, we can really keep our per gram cost down. You know, under 10 cents is my goal constantly, is to keep that under 10 cents.
So
And
Brian,
pre-rolls
how
go-
do you compete with somebody who's one of Josh's clients?
So you mean how would I compete with someone like Josh who grows outdoors?
Yeah, somebody who's growing outdoors with that kind of a cost structure. Right? Advantage in that equation.
You know, really, here in New England, there really isn't too many outdoor growers as of yet. There's a few different reasons for that. One being humidity, one being cold. So we really haven't seen that enter the legal market here in Massachusetts. If I was out in Oregon or Washington State and I was trying to compete with someone like Josh, I think what the differentiator would be, you know, more kind of boutique. You know, you would really have to strive for a target market of quality. You could try and compete scale wise with outdoors, but it's still going to have to be quality in a very mature market. So in an immature market like Massachusetts, you know, I think there's enough leeway right now. People are buying anything that can pass testing. But I think as time goes on, you kind of either have to be a scale player or you have to be a quality player. And it's really tough to kind of have your cake and eat it too with that.
Hang on a second, David. I got a couple of things from the chat room. Okay. And
same here, Jimmy. Just can I jump in here? So Josh, what are the testing regs down in Colombia?
Testing rates?
Yeah,
Testing
what
regulations.
kind of testing is required?
Oh, testing regs. Well, look, it's with CBD, it's similar to USDA, you know, regs. With, you know, when it comes to THC, it's all about, everything in Colombia is based on the buyer. So if you're in, you know, Canada, which is where a lot of the product is going first, it's based on Canadian regulations. And so all the testing regs are based on the buyer country, the import country.
Got it.
Now the other comment in the chat room, and this was a statement by someone who's been very active in our chat room, and let's just say Canaman. I'm not going to go into the last 5 letters or 6 letters, but fertilizer is not needed if you own organic soil. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, that's right. I believe that. That's kind of where I come from. Look, I love indoor production. I'm a big fan of how I think there's a lot of sustainability arguments to be had about indoors, especially when you're talking about New England and production there. But when it comes to growing this plant and what it really wants, I think what we're all trying to do is recreate good soil, and why you can't recreate good soil better than good soil. You know, I think that's really always I'm trying to build. You know, in the tropics, we have a lot of metals and arsenic and things that we have to combat. And the same in the South, I deal with poor soils and lots of issues. But the ultimate goal for all of my clients is to have their finished product growing in good soil, because that's the lowest cost product you can grow.
Heavy metals always, whenever I hear heavy metals in plants, it just freaks me out a little. What is the why is the climate in Humboldt County and the Emerald Triangle so magical?
Yeah, so I mean, I speak a little. I went to college in Santa Cruz. I didn't mention this to you guys, but I worked in that area, and when I was getting my organic farming degree, I was working and on the weekends for different, growers and that type of. And I really say it's a combination of humidity and temperature, and really it's about resources and protection, and kind of the people and the community are what built the Emerald Triangle. To me, it wasn't just because oftentimes the weather's pretty crappy and you had to fight the weather up there a lot. The weather wasn't the best, but you're protected, you're in a good area, you've got most of the elements that the plant wants as long as you can protect it. But you just had good community before. Now, now it's kind of Wild West, literally all over again. But before, it was a very protected community where, you were in a safe space. You could go and grow your product and get it to market and not have to worry about coming into contact with some of the worst elements, which I think exist now more than ever, with cartels and just different, kind of bad elements that are moving in there.
It's crazy, and there was Humboldt County was in the news this week. And by the way, coming up after this live stream is our weekly Weed Talk News. They banned legal hemp growing in Humboldt County, so there won't be any cross-pollination. And I'll be perfectly honest with you guys, I didn't understand it until it was explained to me that that's not a good thing. You don't want your hemp plants and your THC cannabis plants together, even though I understand there's males and females, right, guys?
Oh, that's huge. Look, I grow a lot of CBD, and I mean, that's a huge issue. And I think we're going to have to deal with this as an industry. Where does fiber go? Where does CBD go? Where does THC go? And how do we kind of work this out amongst ourselves? Because it's like popcorn and sweet corn. Popcorn and sweet corn growers can't be neighbors. That's just the way it is. And your pollen has to work with your neighbor's pollen too. We have to be responsible farmers when we're outside.
Right. And, there's a 1-to-1 movement kind of going on, or 2-to-1, CBD, THC. But that's not the way to do it, unfortunately.
Well, why do you say that?
Just because, because a lot of strains are heavy in THC or CBD, and,
Right.
That produces a desirable effect, especially for a lot of patients.
Right.
But to cross-pollinate like that in an open field, would be disastrous, I believe, and that would be best practices.
Christina Di Giovanni from Emerald Media out of New York is a friend, and she spent 10 years in Humboldt County, and she called it seedy weed. You don't want seedy weed. You don't want that cross-pollination. She explained that to me this week. And guys, you look, I'm trying to keep my hibiscus plants alive. It's been really tough this winter to do that. That's all I can say. David?
Either Ryan or Josh, and I know Jimmy hates when I throw it out like that. He prefers I pick somebody, but whichever one of you is more comfortable with this, can you explain what are living soils and what are the benefits of using living soils?
Josh, I'll defer to you. I can dig in, but I'm sure you can really dig in.
Sure. Look, as an organic farmer, I think there's a lot of products and a lot of people that are kind of after this business of living soils. To me, it's about microbiology and mycorrhizae, and we use a lot of different fermented products. Whether that kind of starts with compost and goes to bokashi, which is kind of ancient Japanese techniques of fermenting. And I use these things indoors, outdoors, kind of all around. They help with disease control, with, when you truly have a living soil, which I think is made up of compost and good nutrient, holding, perlites and different types of nutrient holding, vermiculites, things like that. But I think ultimately it's about organic matter and having, active portions of the soil that are living and breathing and perspiring, because those things are what really gets the cannabis plant going. And that's what produces lots of THC, lots of CBD, lots of terpenes, lots of all the cannabinoids come from all of these kind of active processes in the root system. And the more we stimulate, that system, the more we get everything else. And some of that stress with THC, some of that we're kind of stimulating and creating stress to make more THC. But with CBD, we're doing the opposite. We're constantly trying to keep the plant not stressed and keep it unstressed always. So I think it's good to balance either of those in the system.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add, guys, Jimmy, you mentioned soil earlier.
Well, that came from the chat room. I'm going to give credit to our chatters. Go ahead.
Soil is a medium you pay for. Living soil, you get to reuse. And not only do you get to reuse it instead of recycle it, if you do it right, it gets better and better with time. Josh mentioned bokashi. Some of these practices date back to the Incas and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years back to Mesopotamia and the beginning of time. So, it's also a great way to control your cost to produce if you have living soil. Not only do you not have to rebuy that soil each time, but you also can save on nutrients and do it in an organic fashion, which, like Josh said, is going to boost the THC, the terpenes, and it's just a more desirable finished good that people in a immature market like Massachusetts might not demand just yet. But if you go to Oregon and you see what sells for more, it's going to be that no-till living soil, finished good that people are really looking for.
I had no idea. Hey, do either one of you guys have botany degrees, or is this all just learned knowledge about growing?
Sounds like Josh does, but I've been growing since 2005, 95% indoor, a little bit of greenhouse. And I've just kind of learned that as I've gone. And I believe Josh has a little bit more base. Do you have a degree in botany, Josh?
Well, look, my degree was in agroecology and ag education, but I just grown up on the farm. I've grown up selling fruits and vegetables and growing and selling at farmers markets most of my life. I started selling tomatoes and watermelons and cucumbers, and my dad is a vegetable farmer. And when I started growing cannabis on the family farm, I always tell my dad this story because he takes CBD oil, and he's a big fan now, but he used to confiscate my plants. My brother and I used to have plants all over. My dad would threaten to exile us from the family farm, forever. And here we all are. We're in 2021. Arkansas has a legal, a medicinal program, and things have changed quite a bit, so it's been good to kind of live through that in the South to see, my old man who's kind of an old traditional row crop vegetable farmer, but that's where I get it from. And so cannabis to me was a love very early on. Now I get to actually make it my career, not just kind of the thing we were all doing in high school and college, and kind of that was my entry.
Amen.
To it.
That's right. Living the dream, right? Living the dream. I think it's great, guys.
Yeah.
We have come so far. It's why we call this show The Green Rush, That being said, look, we're going to take a break. And I think, David, you'd like me to invite these guys to hang around in the chat room,
Absolutely.
right? If you'd like to hang around, we've got 3 more guests coming in. Steve Goldman, Andrew Matzis from MC Andrews is going to come on with us, and Madison Palms from Adaptive Solutions. They're all due in here from 5 to 6. We're going to expand the forum and open it up to everybody. Our chat room is chatting, amazingly enough. And we're going to have more of the Green Rush after this break. Don't go away. Take your Zoom call podcasts or webinars to a whole new level.
Nurse Mark and the Green Nurse Podcast. We are here.
That's right. PCM can animate your logo, add eye-catching full-screen graphics, and lower third identifying motion graphics. Look like the network. Act like the networked.
Cannabis Media.
And we are back. We are back for the final hour of the Green Rush on a Friday afternoon. Hi, everybody. I'm Jimmy Young with Pro Cannabis Media. We are talking about the economics of cultivation. David Rabinovitz from MassCann and CannaVenture is my co-host, and it was his idea to do the economics of cultivation, and we're off to a great start. So I'm going to throw it over to David and kind of let him dictate and manage the room, introduce people, or have them introduce themselves, whatever you'd like to do, Mr. David.
Well, thanks, Jimmy. So we've got three more guests that have joined us, all very interesting with different perspectives. And we're going to go around the room and let everybody introduce themselves and start with Steve Goldman. Steve, introduce yourself. Tell us about your company and as well as the big recent news about the merger.
So I'll actually kind of start with that. So I'm Stephen Goldman. I am Director of Finance for the Hubcraft. The Hubcraft recently signed a deal to acquire majority interest in the company that myself and my partners founded called Four Trees. So together we have control of a vertical supply chain in Massachusetts that is Tier 3 cultivation and manufacturing in Fitchburg, as well as a retail store and Tier 1 cultivation in Holyoke. In addition to that, we are also the cultivation educators for the state's social equity program.
I was just going to say that you and Nani are the lead teachers of anything cultivation in the for the Cannabis Control Commission.
That's correct.
Andrew, tell us about you and your firm.
Sure. Obviously, I'm Andrew Matzis is my name. Company's MC Andrews. We're out of North Andover, Mass. I started this business in 1997, but my family has a long history in commercial construction. We actually did a lot of public construction, quite large stuff. Established in 1954 by my father, who's 95 and still with us today. So we do a lot of schools, hospitals, prisons, things like that. We kind of fell into this cannabis business. About 4 or 5 years ago, there was a distressed project out in Fitchburg for a grow facility, and we were called in to take over the project. Quickly realized that a lot of unrealistic expectations by the owners, architects and engineers that, weren't quite up to speed. So we ended up taking over the whole thing on a design build basis, which is how we do about 85% of our work. And the job went fantastic. And it was actually the first greenhouse in the state of Mass. So we did that, and it really just opened up from there, frankly. We've been almost doing about 85% of our volume in the cannabis industry since for the last 4 or 5 years. So that's kind of how we got started in it. I'd say, we have a different perspective. Obviously, we're on the construction side, so I don't know much about the growing and all the plants and all that kind of stuff. But if you want to talk about buildings, we're the guy to talk to. And we have a different approach than most people. Most guys, go hire their own architects, engineers, have their drawings done, and put it out to bid to multiple general contractors. We do that too. It's not our preference. We like to get in early with the owners, and we provide a design build services. And it really pays dividends. So we house all the architects and engineers to design the facilities and take it right through, inception to occupancy, providing a single source responsibility for our clients, which is huge because a lot of these guys go out there and they want to hire this piece by themselves and this piece by themselves, and they heard about this and my friend does this, and there's always problems, and you get the finger pointing to everybody. So we eliminate that. What we see in the industry is just unrealistic expectations in time and dollars. Ends up being 3 times what they think it's going to cost and taking 3 times longer. The design build approach we take is a little bit different. So we'll take a set of documents. Typically, there's fees for engineers and architects to do a job. I'm going to use round numbers. It's $100,000. Normally, a client will go out and they'll spend $100,000 and have this beautiful set of documents, and they put it out to bid. They got a budget of $5 million, but gee, the price just came in $8 million. What do? They go hire these guys to redesign everything all over again and spend $200,000. What the way we do things is we take drawings to about 50% complete. Enough for us to put a price on the job. and do due diligence with the site, all the engineering, our clients, the whole 9 yards, layouts, that, this and that. And we're able to give them a guaranteed maximum price, and they've only spent 50% of their design fees. That price hopefully is in line because we're designing around a budget rather than no budget in mind when you're doing design. However, if it's over budget, we're able to now tweak the plans during that final phase without spending any money for design. Well, that second phase is happening and we're spending the other half of the fees and finishing the design. We're starting to work. It's typically site clear. It could be demoing a building, could be gutting a building. We're shaving months and months off time because these guys are spending huge money typically on leases. And that's the way we approach things. We've kind of morphed more into the dispensary side. There's 10 of those for every grow facility that's going up. The grow facilities, we've done several. We find that a lot of these guys, a lot of tire kickers out there and using us for an estimation exercise that we're not, we don't need the practice. And, 3 years down the road, they might get something. So we don't spin a lot of wheels on that so much anymore. We're focusing mostly on the dispensary side right now. And we're doing all of them design build throughout the state of Massachusetts. So it's
Andrew,
been
take a
great for
moment,
us.
because I think it's going to be important. We've got a lot of people who are watching today who want to become cultivators. And one of the common conversation I'll have with folks is growing, and I'm not a grower, I can't grow anything, but growing 10, 12, 20 plants in your house is not the same as growing in a commercial setting. Explain what design build means. I mean, I know it, I work in I do a lot in the engineering and architecture field, but I think it's going to be an important concept for folks to understand and why it's so much more advantageous to work with somebody in a design build type relationship.
Yeah, I think I mentioned a few of the advantages of it already. You have a single source responsibility. That's the biggest, plus side of it. But time frame is obviously, a value. So you have that single source responsibility where all the architects and engineers are under one umbrella. So all the insurances and warranties are through one guy. So we do that, but the time saving is a huge factor in it as well. But we meet with the owners. We literally start from conception with little bubble diagrams and sketches. We come up with floor plans. They have a program of what they're looking to accomplish. We design around it. And then this is a process that goes back and forth for several months until we come down to a fixed program and a fixed, it starts with the layout, of the building. We'll look at site restrictions and different scenarios of building types and things like that. We're always talking value engineering because we've got dollars in mind all the time. So when we get to that fixed stage, then it starts going into, we'll bring in the, sprinkler engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical, the whole gamut, and any specialty product engineering as well, structural, whatever it may be. And we develop a full, concise set of documents that we then go build by. So we provide that whole service from start to finish to a single client.
Superb.
Yeah.
And Madison, so if somebody doesn't want to build out a full building, or let's say they need to get growing really fast while they've got some of the development going on in another wing, you've got a solution for that. Tell us about it.
Absolutely. No, thanks for having me on the show today, David. Good to see you. My name is Madison Palms. I'm the CEO and founder of Agdaptive, a Boston-based agricultural technology company specializing in the design and development of controlled environment cultivation systems, which are purpose-built for the different growth stages of cannabis, hemp, and other crop types. So we offer a variety of configurations of our platform, which are tailored to the specific needs and goals of cultivators of any size and scale. So to your point, David, these systems are perfect for any size cultivator looking to get up and off the ground, whether it be for, specific stages of growth for, propagation, clone, tissue culture, or, vegetative or flowering additional space, as well as full production capacities and capabilities. So we offer a full gamut of systems and technologies to enable cultivators, at any starting point, or, those looking to expand on their current footprint, the ability to do so in a cost-effective and very efficient manner, which also, further perpetuates their ability to scale systematically thereafter.
Jimmy, before I keep going, you want to jump in?
Well, the only thing I'd love to add is I'd love to hear Josh Harden and Andrew Matzis have a conversation, just so that we could have the Southern drawl and the Boston accent talking to each other. I think that would be an interesting dynamic. And it also kind of goes to show you that there are different parts of this country now that are working towards and getting into the cannabis industry in whatever capacity they're comfortable with. I want to make sure that the people in the forum understand, if you have a specific question that you'd like to ask someone in this forum, please jump right in. This is kind of a free-for-all where we like to have our guests have an opportunity to talk to different, like, tell us a little bit more about this or that, or what you guys are into. So I just want to make sure I'm giving you all the green flag and the green light to go ahead and chit chat amongst yourselves. But what is the biggest challenge for a grower besides the cost of electricity, which I'm guessing, and especially for indoor facilities, and why haven't there been more solar powered grow facilities in the state of Massachusetts? I know that Solar Therapeutics down in Somerset is, I believe, the only one still. Do you see an opportunity to tap into solar energy at some point? And Brian, I'm going to start with you because you're the closest in my quadrant, or maybe not over there, but you are here.
Sure. So I also think it's surprising that more people haven't looked to solar. I think that these projects are such electrical hogs that it looks daunting. You can cover the whole roof and it's still just going to take one little piece of it. So I really hope that changes from a sustainability standpoint. But unfortunately, it just doesn't seem like we're there just yet. I would say real estate costs, electricity, overhead, and you can mitigate some of that overhead with automation and with having strict SOPs that really work. And I think that besides that, I would say your post-harvest sterilization is expensive. Procurement of genetics that people want, it can be expensive. And I think just overall, I think from a cost produce perspective, there is ways that you can shave off from human resources but it's a laborious and CapEx and OpEx really bloated on both. So
anybody else want to weigh in on solar? Andrew, have you ever done any solar construction?
I have not. I think factor of space is a big issue with it, and consistency of it. So no, I haven't done any of it.
Okay, Madison, you got any solar issues there?
I can definitely like to jump in. Ryan, no, all good points, all points that I second. I absolutely think it's a space factor and also efficiency factor. The technology for solar across the board just really isn't there yet in terms of the number of panels and the size of the array necessary to capture anything remotely significant that can be applied to cannabis cultivation or anything for that matter, to where it makes sense to deploy something across the entire surface of a roof. But in addition to solar, I would say cultivators that are looking to operate as efficiently as possible, I think should consider and be open to all different forms of energy and looking to layer those on in different ways as much as possible to reduce the footprint to the greatest extent, whether it be geothermal, solar, use of sensors and analytics, of course, internally to be able to understand where your costs, electricity, heat, how everything is sort of operating in unison so that you can continue to drive down your energy usage and also operating costs, which at the end of the day comes down to the bottom line. So I think there's a number of things to consider and for cultivators to be on the lookout for as far as new and emerging technologies.
Stephen, you got anything to add about solar?
Sure. So I will say that by the regs 935 CMR does require cultivators to at least evaluate on-site power generation, whether that is solar, whether that's natural gas cogeneration. Actually, the Hubcraft's project in Fitchburg is going to employ a natural gas cogeneration that actually allows us to reuse waste heat and waste CO2 within the facility. So it's important for cultivators to be as efficient as possible. But the reality is with solar, just the density of the power that you can get from a solar array is not really enough. Especially if you're an indoor cultivator, you don't necessarily have the availability of land. You're not going to get the kind of power you need. Plus, another thing cultivators need to consider is their demand. One of the demand strategies that cultivators often employ in indoor facilities, flowering is a 12-hour lights on, lights off period. So a lot of cultivators like to set a point, say in the middle of a shift or in the middle of the day, where some of your flower rooms turn on and some of them turn off at the same time. And that way your peak demand, the amount of strain you're putting on the power grid at any given time, is reduced by a significant margin, close to half. And one of the reasons that the Cannabis Control Commission makes you evaluate this on-site power generation is not necessarily because of the amount of power used, but how much power instantaneously is being drawn from the grid. And solar can offset that a little, but really the fact that power density is an issue, and the fact that in the Northeast, especially, your insularity, the amount of sun that you can get per square foot of land, not only is a lot less than in a lot of places as you start to go south, but as you get towards the winter months, it can be about a fifth of what you see during the summer, if not less. It is not completely reliable. And not only that, battery technology, while on its way up, is not what it needs to be in order to sustain operations that need to be interpreting that need for reducing demand by having a strategy that's 12 on, 12 off. So you might see an uptick in the use of solar when battery technology starts to take off. I know Tesla is doing a lot of experiments on that in Australia. I can't imagine we're going to see effective usage of batteries in the power grid for another decade or so. One of the important things is to try and situate yourself in a municipality that generates some of their power with renewables. I know that our project in Holyoke has its own power grid powered by the Connecticut River, where I believe within the next 5 years, the plan is to go to 100% hydroelectric power generation. There are actually a lot of towns in Massachusetts that do that, where solar may not be the most viable option, may not even be the most cost effective, and may actually not be the most environmentally conscious option. You may be able to get your renewables from other sources, and that's probably what you're going to have to do until battery technology catches up in terms of efficacy and cost.
Jeff S. in our chat room has a specific question for Andrew, and it has to do, we know that you've got like a one-stop shop for construction and plans from the get-go. They want to know if you also get involved in any of the municipal processes, and I think I know the answer to that question. Andrew, what?
I said, unfortunately, I do. Yeah, I'm pulled into a lot of, municipality meetings when they're looking for their approvals because they may have questions for me or our security people. So yeah, I get pulled into that quite a bit, write narratives, do special presentations and things like that.
Gotcha. Okay. Good. So there's your answer.
You drive, obviously, building permits and that sort of thing. You drive forward, but you're not the lead on, for example, the host community agreement process.
Absolutely not. Nope.
Right. So you're helping with the HCA, but once you get past that, you get into, okay, we're going to do the construction, then you take the lead on getting the permits and what's needed.
Absolutely. But even before that, when they're looking for their host agreements, they'll have community outreach meetings or so on, and their special permit meetings. So I'll usually attend those as well.
I see that Josh is back with us. Josh, I want to make sure you unmute yourself because I want to ask you a specific question. When you're in Columbia, obviously it's more conducive for outdoor growing. Do they even play with solar power at all? Do they need to?
Well, look, it's still the tropics. I think that's one of the big misconceptions. And Farmacielo, the largest company down there, lost about $1 million on their first harvest because they tried to grow it outside, and so there's still a ton of controls required to grow. We have, above and beyond restrictions, biocontrols, and thrips fabric. Every single square inch of the greenhouse is sealed, and even though we're calling it outside, we are still in heavily controlled environments because of the insects and the diseases, and just the humans can move that stuff around so quickly and they can destroy a crop. Down there, that's the biggest, the problem is controlling the entrance and, just the movement of diseases and things. But, as far as renewable energy, we are doing mostly what I found in Colombia is we're water rich. And so our biggest renewable projects have been in electricity generation from all the little rivers and streams. It's so cheap to hook a turbine up to a river that runs year round. And we're doing solar just for the generation of water pumps, and so we're doing really low demand projects that are remote because you're up a mountain somewhere, you don't have the option to use power, so it's more of just direct current pumps that run all day and then they shut off at night. There's no battery. We're trying to really keep that stuff minimal, but I think when it comes to the tropics, we have to kind of rethink and use most of the time solar is not beneficial. We've done studies in most of the areas. We brought in specialists and they say there's no way you can make your money back even in 20 years, off putting solar panels. And so we've had to put our money in other projects, whether that's geothermal or just using hydro power too.
All right, now I want to ask a question about water. Not that I do not pretend to be a grower in any way. And that being said, I have talked to a few growers in the state of Maine. And they claim, and again, you talk about a short season outdoors anyway, but the water that they have access to through well water in the state of Maine, they believe gives them some kind of competitive edge as far as the product and crop that they're able to produce. How important is the quality of the water in the grow? I already learned about fertilized soil and reusing that. But what about water? What role does, obviously you need water to grow plants. That much I know. Ryan, go ahead.
So Maine probably does have a leg up because if we're talking from an indoor basis, Jimmy, they probably don't have to RO it, or if they do, it's a lot easier. Whereas someone who has either hard or soft water, they're going to need to pass my microbial and heavy metal test. They're going to need to put it through an RO system, which is inherently expensive. And there's a lot of waste involved, up to, I think, 4 to 5 to 1 waste to get it right where you want to get it to feed the plants. So I think people up in Maine probably do have a leg up. And when it comes to outdoors and greenhouse, that is really key because, they have it coming out of the tap, basically what we pay for Poland Springs here in Massachusetts. So I think they really do have something there.
Have you ever seen the spring? Have you ever been to Poland Springs?
No.
Has anybody in the room been to Poland Spring, Maine? I just want to know. Andrew, I would think you would have gone there.
Only if that's not on the fishing ground, so I wouldn't be there. And I'm only on the saltwater side. No.
I'm sorry. All right.
But I've come across these issues before in some of the facilities we did, and we had to put RO systems in. Yeah.
There you go. Stephen, water. What's the role of water?
Okay, so this may very well be one of those scenarios where every grower has their own tips and tricks and secret technique, when the reality may be a little bit simpler than that. There are a lot of facilities that by choice, a grower may want reverse osmosis water. So in order to take care of that, you're going to have to probably pre-treat that water to extend the life of your filters. Ryan is right. RO is a little bit of a wasteful technology. The very best systems may put out 1 part wastewater to 4 parts usable water. Often it's sometimes the reverse of that. You are using a membrane to concentrate all of the ppm, all of the parts in that water on one side, and completely filter it out and send it to your plants. You may then also need to control microbial growth in your water to get it to the plants. You may have systems like ozone, you may have systems like ultraviolet light. My particular favorite system is electrolyzed water. I've seen it in Canada. I absolutely worship the stuff. Realistically, it's just going to come down to your grower's choice. As long as you're not feeding it something that's going to make the plant sick, it tends to be okay. And there are also facilities that may want to recycle their water to be, even less wasteful, in which case you're probably going to be pulling condensate off your dehumidification system. You're probably going to have a somewhat expensive system to filter out anything that may be in there, probably heavy metals. You're going to need to sanitize that water again and get it back out to your plants. And then you may just take water from the source and feed it right to your plants, and it could be okay. It's really going to come down to the expertise of your growers, how clean your facility is. As long as you're working clean and you understand not to put dirty water or water directly from your dehumidifiers right into your plants. Generally, as long as your plant's getting its nutritional needs, it's light, it's water, it's CO2, you're going to do fine.
Josh, you got anything to add about water?
No, I mean, I think everybody's said a lot of it, but look, water is everything. Water is the life of the operation. And I spend a lot of time and energy when we're building new grows. That's most of where I spend my time and trying to get it right, because I've come in to too many grows and their water systems have huge problems, and most of it is with pH and algae, and just kind of these containment systems just were not well thought out, or there wasn't a maintenance plan. There wasn't an SOP written for how to maintain the water system. And I think that's usually where I come in. There's disasters, there's clogs, there's, all kinds of different issues going on in the system. Well, it usually comes down to either water quality or the water system maintenance and kind of how it's managed, whether that's with chlorine or, with chemicals, or by using kind of saltwater systems. And, just having good maintenance, I think, is key, because good water can still turn bad. Your pH can go off in the middle of a grow, or that electrical conductivity can just go way down. We've had to deal with those issues where it just was a pipe issue or a water system issue that just had gone untouched for too long, and it became toxic.
And Madison, since you have a data-driven controlled environment production system, I'm guessing water is pretty important to your data.
Of course, no, and across the board, I mean, as many others have said here, extremely important to have quality, balanced water, just a key ingredient input from the start. And to Stephen's point, as much as you can recycle water, reuse water, extremely cost effective, and makes a ton of sense to do so. And another really interesting point that I've seen across multiple states that's a major factor that's emerging is, amongst regulators and in the industries, across each, state is the impact that runoff and disposal of dirty water is having on municipal and state sewage systems. And so I think that is very much going to, change the regulations substantially in the way that cultivators conduct their operations going forward. And I think that's going to take hold very soon, and will almost force cultivators to really look seriously at reusing water at a much more substantial scale than they have, which could obviously spike some operational costs in the meantime, but I think ultimately will be a great thing for the industry at large. And of course, if everybody is forced to do that, scale will obviously drive down the cost to do those things, and everybody will benefit from that, from nutrient costs and water costs and so on and so forth. So it's extremely important, and we're continuing to look at it more and more precisely over for each harvest cycle and year here. So
Great. David, I'm going to give David a little credit here. He is a numbers guy. If any of you know him, yeah, he loves to analyze numbers. And I know that he's done extensive work about the amount of growers going on in Massachusetts. And I know we've already established a very high per pound wholesale rate for cannabis. So David, now that I've set you up, where would you like the conversation to go regarding that and the economics of cultivation here with this group?
Well, let's talk a little bit about how much it costs to actually put a cultivation facility together. Ryan's going through that now. Andrew knows that better than anybody else, right? Madison lives in that world because he's on the edge, and Steve has been through that. So let's share with people, what kind of a budget should somebody have for, let's say, a small craft cultivator, and what size are we talking about? And who wants to start that discussion off?
I'll start a little bit. A lot
Andrew,
of people.
why don't you go?
A lot of people ask me that question, and my standard answer is I don't have my crystal ball, because site impacts are huge. I have no idea what site they have there, where utilities are coming from, if there's ledge, if there's wetlands on the area. So it's a huge unknown. If you want to talk the building piece, then there's many different types as well. We inside an old mill building like Fitchburg, like we do most of them in. We're doing a greenhouse, so we're doing a pre-engineered metal building. So there's just huge, array of space between, budgets, on what these things cost. And then, growers kind of dictate. When we start talking to people, you get the growers come in and they all have an idea of how they want to do things, and they don't want to listen to a lot of stuff. So rather than us, give them numbers, we try and just create simpler and better means of construction and ways to do things with what they're trying to do. But historically, these things are running $300-400 a square foot all day long for the building itself.
Steve, you were going to start us off there. Jump in and see what we can build onto that.
Sure. So it's interesting. We're actually, we put together a facility design course for the social equity program for the Cannabis Control Commission. And this is one of those catch-22s for anybody that's not an MSO, anybody that's not coming in with a lot of funding. You have to fundraise. You have to understand, how much do I need to budget for this build? And one of the common misconceptions among growers who have done a lot of, maybe they've done home growing, or maybe they've been a cultivator in other facilities but haven't really been on the team starting it themselves, is the concept, I can do a lot of this myself. I know how to do it cheaply. It's going to work out just fine. The reality is not so much. There are a lot of things you're not really allowed to touch. You're not going to be running your own 480 volt, wiring. You're not going to run, your own high pressure piping unless you have the license to do that work in Massachusetts.
You're pulling a permit if you're not licensed either. So
exactly.
We come across all the time, which is why I mentioned when we started out, I don't really chase a lot of this stuff anymore, because this is what I'm confronted with many times. Unrealistic expectations. And when we talk surveillance and security, they're like, what's that? I need to do that? Well, yeah, it's a big part of your number. Yeah. So there's a lot of, I agree with you.
And the costs of building a compliant facility, you need to start somewhere. I think the bare minimum you might spend, if you know the right people, if you know what you're doing, maybe around $200 a square foot. But reality is probably going to start climbing upwards to $350 a square foot. There are going to be a lot of differences based on how clean you want your facility, how advanced your HVAC system, because probably the most expensive component is an advanced mechanical system in a facility, and also one of the most critical components to get the design right from the start, coming in with your water usage numbers and building from that. And whether you're going single tier, double tier, more than that, things change. And to Andrew's point too, even the type of building you're in, if you're in a pre-engineered steel building, if you're lucky enough to get a clear open span space, you may not have the problems that you're going to have building in a mill building, where you have to deal with 130-year-old architecture. You're going to have to build around a bunch of wooden posts. You're probably going to have to come in and remediate lead, asbestos, You're going to have to cover any wood surfaces so you don't have any place for water to creep in and mold to build up. There are advantages and disadvantages to types of buildings, to locations, to building materials, and the reality is you need a budgetary to start raising money, and it's always going to be a lot more than you think it is, and you're probably going to throw your hands up in the air and say, why is it so expensive? Well, I mean, that's what you're just going to have to budget for, and you're going to have to work around, and that is the bane to craft cultivators, especially in Massachusetts. There really is an economy of scale in this industry. The larger your project, the better your EBITDA is going to be. The better your OpEx is going to be. The better your margins are going to be. But the smaller you are, you're going to have difficulty paying your investors back that you're going to have to bring in. You're probably not going to end up owning your company based on how much money you have to raise to start a small cultivation center, and it does present a huge problem, especially since you're not really going to get a bank loan in this industry. It is incredibly difficult to fundraise, so you have to find a lot more money than you're comfortable with. And not only that, you also have to be able to pay your holding costs, hold your building, and it takes a lot of people upwards of 2 years from when they start to when they can actually launch. It is incredibly expensive. If you can make it, it can be a lucrative industry, but really the economy of scale starts to play in, and the smaller the facility, the harder it is to get operational.
Define small, somebody. 1,000 square feet, more, less, what?
You're probably not going to want to build smaller than
5,000.
Under 5.
You can do under 5 and be okay. Once you start getting real low, if you say I want to have one room and I want to do this, and I have no extra financial backing, I don't have a cushion for this operation, it starts to get scary, because this is a very expensive industry, not just to build, but to operate. And the cost of compliance is absolutely huge in Massachusetts.
That's interesting, Stephen, because I come from the gray area of cultivating, and everyone thinks they can just blow out a basement with some can fans and some HPS, and you start learning about the 36 watts per square foot from the CCC and security. You really can't pull this off as lean as you think. And I think people are in for a rude awakening sometimes. For example, we put together a very good conceptual budget. And what happened? We didn't realize that the whole building needed to be sprinklered. That's $200K. The building needs more wattage. That's $250K. So that's $500,000 for not 1 gram of pot. So, scope creep is real in this world. And anyone that's listening to this, please budget between 20 and 30% more. You might even need more, but just ask for more. You're going to need it.
That's kind of the advantage of someone like myself. We go in there and we get these calls all the time to go meet with people. They rented the space and they're spending $30,000 a month to rent this building here. And Sprinkler is a great example, because we confronted exactly that. Don't ask me how this 45,000 square foot building was built without Sprinkler, but now the municipality see you coming in here and they're like, you better bring a new service. It's 2 miles down the street. So that building they're now renting, forget it. So we go through these wild goose chases all the time with people with thoughts of grandeur without really doing any due diligence in the design build scenario that we provide. You're usually shaking all this stuff out before you spent all your money, and it proves the way to go.
To take a step back, before doing anything, I think it's extremely important to get a clear understanding of what your goals are, and then assess what resources you need to achieve those goals. I know a lot of you have talked about, getting the facility and getting going and what does it cost. And I think that a lot of people make the mistake of having just that anxiousness and sort of impulsive desire to just find a place and sign an HCA and, get the process going. And they really don't think through, what they need to achieve the goals that they have. And to Ryan's point, you can get, and Andrew, I'm sure you've seen this, as you said, I mean, people get stuck with something that they think that they wanted, or they think that they could grow into, or, so on and so forth. And they get stuck with all these, things that have to be fixed or renovated or redeveloped. And they end up, extremely far under, under what they're capable of executing on. And, and just overestimating what they're going to be able to do in the time frame that they're going to be able to do it. And they really set themselves up for failure by not laying out those goals clearly from the get-go, and then really planning for their desired facility, 5 years out into the future. A lot of people obviously just want to get going here and now. And then, the pivoting costs that can be incurred if you don't think ahead are substantial. I mean, you can't afford to shut down and redo all these things, and it's lost money on both sides. So I think that's a huge step that people often overlook. And, when they jump into it like that, they end up really just squeezing themselves out of their own ability to get off the ground and become operational, and then give themselves a chance to actually scale, and continue to grow their business successfully.
We're seeing a ton of this. A lot of people just simply can't weather the storm. They can't weather the weight. And a lot of these places are actually going under before they even, get any permits or anything. We've got municipalities calling us. Hey, we know you're doing a lot of this stuff. This guy just went belly up. We gave the host agreement to, anybody else that wants to go into the spot? We're getting calls like that now. So there's a lot of this going on. They just don't have the capital to withstand the, what it takes.
I think being realistic and starting small is extremely, extremely important. And I mean, you may never get there if you shoot for the stars and just bite off more than you can chew, and then end up barely keeping your head above water and trying to weather these storms as you get through the licensing process. And as much as you can, start small, scale up. Leverage financing, debt for various things. We've begun offering that for our systems and solutions to be able to give people the opportunity to scale up and grow. That also allows these cultivators to maintain more of the ownership in their business and not give it all away from the get-go, or potentially face bankruptcy, God forbid. So I think those things are just crucial to be aware of and to think methodically about before being so eager to just dive in.
Yeah, I think one of the realities is you can spend, if you're not prepared, it is possible you could spend your entire life savings just waiting to get to your final license. And that's the reality for some people. And with the, almost lack of financing that a lot of other businesses have access to, it is incredibly difficult. And it's not something you dive into blindly, because you can impact your entire life just from this couple year span, trying to hold on to a building, waiting to either complete a larger fundraise than you were prepared to, or get through a process that it's going to take a while. It's
Totally.
Something you need to really evaluate before going in. Can I take this risk? Can I be doing 14-hour days, 7 days a week, just to stay afloat while the business starts up? It is not a given that it is for everybody, and then the reality is now it's very tough.
So if we had somebody who was they want to start a grow operation, and the first thing they're going to do is look for real estate, what are the attributes that you would direct them to, and what are the attributes you would direct them away from? Like, what do you look for, and what do you run away from?
Run away from old buildings, mill buildings, things that require substantial renovation, construction, demolition. The cleaner the slate, the better off you are. I mean, of course, raw land in Massachusetts is hard to come by, but a shell of a building or anything of that nature that is a footprint that can sort of be built upon, and that you can craft a facility around is ideal. For those looking to stack or go multi-tier, of course, high ceilings, access to heavy power, water, of course. Some of these towns, of course, as Stephen mentioned, have different costs and access to water and to power. So I think those things are really, really important. Accessibility to where the end product is going can drive up or reduce cost of goods sold into the market. So definitely a variety of factors. Of course, the town being a huge one. You don't want to try to go after a municipality that is not favorable to cannabis or has not, permitted a single company or even been open to it. You're really setting yourself up for failure if you do that in a long waiting period and substantial cost. So I think, those things considered, I would go for the cleanest, barest footprint that you possibly can, and if you could get raw land, even better, because the infrastructure, modular prefabricated buildings that you can put up are just as effective as any building that you would construct in a traditional fashion these days. They can be put up quickly, 6 months or less, in all the insulation that you need, and they'll last for 25 plus years. Most of them will.
Andrew, what do you think of that?
Excuse me?
I was saying, what do you, and add in some, what's your view on this?
What's my view on it? It's always better to start with the structure that's already there that's sound, because you're not building it up from scratch. The zoning, the permitting that's required with new structures these days there's no good prime land left. So there's all stuff that's problematic, and it's lengthy and time consuming. If I can find a nice parcel that's already zoned, that's a structurally sound building, in my opinion. But as he said, I would definitely recommend going into an area where the municipalities are welcoming. That's why everyone's going to Fitchburg. I think there's 12. When I left there was 12 facilities there already. So a lot of people like the old mills, though. There are some real dumps I've been in that have been, no roofs for 30 years, and there are some that are pretty clean. So that's the way I'd go, and that's what a lot of people. We're looking at old airport hangars, old warehouse buildings, bus stations, old metal buildings. So most of the guys that we find are coming to us are not with new construction. It's renovating existing facilities.
Yeah, I could certainly add to that too. I'm going to echo what Madison and Andrew said. The municipality is the first thing you have to consider. I can tell you from experience, in Holyoke, the host community agreement process is, here's your host community agreement.
Give me my 3%.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And, well, you do have to consider that when you're doing your financial planning, that municipal impact fee is 3%. The way it's written is 3% of gross. That's not 3% of net. And that is a much bigger deal, especially when you're dealing with the 280E tax code that's already coming out. But a lot of towns that used to be heavy industrial towns where the industry has disappeared, Fitchburg, Holyoke, Uxbridge, things like that, are going to be very receptive, especially for people coming in that want to redevelop what they might consider blighted properties. A lot of the old mill buildings, while they may be difficult to work in, the towns are going to be very happy that someone is coming in that's going to use that's going to clean it up, and it's not just going to sit there abandoned and falling apart. I would say the holy grail of indoor cultivation properties, if you lucked out and found a pre-engineered steel building with a concrete floor, a big clear span, a big high ceiling, cheap and plentiful power that somehow managed to be in the green zone of a town that was friendly to a cultivator, that's the best thing you can hope for, because it's like this blank canvas. And the problem is, at this point in time, you can guarantee that by the time you find this building, unless someone claimed that building and went under, they've probably had hundreds of phone calls, hundreds of tours from people, and then those get snatched up real fast. The big open spaces, they were hard to find, before legalization came online, and they're not really any easier to find now.
I got lucky. I found a building that checked all those boxes, Stephen. Open shell, high ceilings, concrete floor. The cheap power part, I'm not sure how you can get around that, but in Uxbridge with 1.5% impact fee. So I thank you, Blake Mensing, great attorney.
Blake.
Shameless plug for Blake.
He's an FOD, friend of David too.
Yes. So Blake saw the situation we had at our old place, and he was nice enough to welcome us as his neighbor in Uxbridge. So we're right next to Blake, and we really love Uxbridge. We think they're welcoming, and they really want us there, which is, it's really nice.
Is Stephen Mandeli still a selectman in Uxbridge?
He is. He's a fellow disabled veteran like myself. So I really like Steve.
He's going to be on our show next week when we talk about veterans in cannabis.
Fabulous.
And he's the answer to a trivia question. I'm sure like playing like Jeopardy here.
Right, the first.
He was the first adult use recreational buyer at Cultivate in I think it was November 20th, 2018 was the date. I'm pretty sure, because that was history, and I was happy to be there. And that's when I first met Stephen and heard his story, and it's quite remarkable. We are going to wrap up here in a little while, but I think there's something, there's an elephant in the room here, guys, and I mean that honestly. We're all the same gender. We're all the same race. There are opportunities. The laws are going to be passed to make it more accessible for those who have been most impacted by the war on drugs to get into this business. You guys have done a great job of outlining how expensive that really is. Chris Webber recently just made a $100 million fund with JW Asset Management available to those who have been most impacted on the war on drugs. Let's talk about women, for instance, here. There's got to be some women that are good growers out there. We weren't able to find them for this show. We'd love to encourage them to get in touch with us. Do you know anyone in the growing community that is either a social equity applicant or a female? I guess that would be the both thing. Both, that would be the same thing, wouldn't it? Anybody? Come on. Thank you, Stephen.
I can start, and I can tell you that my wife, Noni Goldman, is one of the best growers there is, and a brilliant company leader. I hope she's watching right now. So
good job. And that's right. And it is a female plant, right? I learned that part. Okay.
Yeah, the flowers come from the female plant. She's she is a female. She is Asian, incredibly intelligent, incredibly effective leader. And she's the leader of Four Trees and is taking leadership position in the Hubcraft because of it, and absolutely is deserving of it.
Anybody else want to talk about she who must be obeyed in their lives?
On the dispensary side, we're seeing some women manage facilities, not necessarily minorities or anything, but typically, I'll give you one example. We did the Western Front in Chelsea. A woman named Cassandra is managing it over there. They're an economic empowerment.
And Marvin Gilmore is involved with that too. And he is a legend.
On the phone with him today.
There you go.
Everybody else they're involved with.
Yeah, we got Caroline's Cannabis, fellow Uxbridge, very, very good operator in the space. She was in my social equity class with David as our teacher. And
Professor Rabinovitz?
Yes, David went above and beyond and really made sure that our class was experiential, and we all got a lot out of it. So thanks, David.
Isn't Chris Vining involved with that organization?
What was that?
Is Chris Vining involved with that organization, I believe, isn't he?
I'm not familiar.
Front.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, he's the Harvest Club.
I get you.
And another person, Lori Lucian, she's an attorney and a real great advocate. one of the best speakers I've met in this space. And she's a co-owner with my friend Ulysses, minority owner. They own Major Bloom, who's going to be opening a dispensary in Worcester this year. And they also have a grow in North Attleboro.
Is that Professor Ulysses Youngblood you're talking about?
Yes, my fellow Clarkie.
Now
Yes.
I see a connection. All right. One
Yes.
of my favorite interviews over the last year. I just want to say we run it as many times as we can because we were so impressed with his story and he's teaching at Clark, right?
Yes. Cool. I was a student there.
There you go.
So Jimmy, we're running into the last 2 minutes. Why don't we run around the horn and let anybody who we'll start with Josh since he's the furthest away, and any closing comments, suggestions, recommendations.
Or how people can get in touch with you. That's always really important. We want to make sure we give this opportunity for you to sell yourselves, tell a little bit more about yourself, and how can people get in touch with you. Josh, go ahead.
Sure, I'll do both of those. I want to start just by saying I think this panel has done a great job kind of highlighting some of the real risk, and I think that most people should. What I see is people don't do their homework, and I think that what I've heard everybody here say is do your due diligence and spend a lot of time. And for me, from my point, Southern Grown really is a company that comes along when a business is mature, but I'm more and more going after new growers because I think they more and more realize compliance needs to be step one, not step 4 or step 5, that not just governmental compliance, but also industry compliance and having SOPs and having all that. I think that's what I spend a lot of my time on, and really trying to provide growers with the right infrastructure to meet the demands of the buyer. And if you're going to be in this business, you need to spend all of your time thinking about your buyer and not your grower and your cultivator, because the buyer is who moves everything. And so, I think for me, Southern Grown is a way that I get to interact with a lot of growers. I get to be passionate and share the passion of growing, but also kind of being part of the maturing of this market, which is requiring everybody to grow up and cut their costs, raise their quality bar, to do kind of all of those things at once and meet what seem like impossible demands, but to do it. That's what farming and growing. And I'm fortunate to be a 5th generation farmer, and a lot of folks in this industry are 1st generation. But what I can tell you is that it never gets easier, no matter how many generations grow or how much money you have. It's always farming. It's always difficult. It's always a challenge, and plants always die and diseases always come, but you get better and you get stronger, and you hopefully pass down, better ways to do things to the next generation, but it's still farming. And I think that we all have to realize that we're working with nature, and the more we do that, the more money we can make, the more we work with her and not against her. So I appreciate the opportunity again. And, my website, southerngrownusa.com, and southerngrownjosh@gmail is my.
There you go. Good job. Yeah. Very good, Josh. Who's next?
Thank you.
Stephen, go.
Sure. Okay. So, general takeaways: if you are getting into cannabis cultivation, it is not impossible, but remember, it takes a long time. It is expensive. You're going to want to do it cleanly. You're going to want to do it the right way. You're going to have to hire licensed contractors. You're going to have to hire professionals like Andrew. It can be done. Just prepare yourself for delays. Prepare yourself for costs. To keep track with what I am doing, to get in touch with me. Keep an eye out for the Hubcraft and 4 Trees Holyoke coming online by the end of this year. The Hubcraft in Fitchburg may be one of the largest indoor living soil facilities in the entire country. We'll be producing craft flower, including our own exclusive strain, 2-time New England Harvest Cup winner, Davy Jones. Woo!
Good job, Steve. Good job.
Oh, yeah. And you can learn more about us at thehubcraft.com, 4treesma.com, and look for the Hubcraft and 4treesma on Instagram, and always keep up with our work with the Social Equity Program, developing cultivation curriculum for the Cannabis Control Commission. And thank you very much for having me on the program.
Absolutely. And can't wait to have another Harvest Cup. You know what I mean? I can't wait to go back to those cannabis conventions.
Yes.
Andrew, the last word about MC Andrews. How do they find you?
Sure. Our website is, mcandrewsco.com. You'll see an info email there. If you want to get in touch with me, that comes directly to me. We like to get involved in projects right from the ground up. We kind of have there's a level of trust when you're dealing with a design build arrangement. And we get very close to our clients, and we have a real professional team, and we take the team approach on everything. And that's the way we like to do it. We give a level of service that I think is second to none. And most of our businesses repeat word of mouth, because of that. So thank you again for having me on. I appreciate it.
No problem. We are the mouth of the cannabis industry.
Excellent.
Madison, go ahead.
For those looking to get into cultivation, be very diligent with the planning process and absolutely plan for the future. The more effectively that you plan and the more methodical that you are, the more capital, headaches, and time that you will save yourself down the road. An overall takeaway here. And as far as getting a hold of me, www.agdaptive.com, AGDAPTIVE. My email, mpalms@agdaptive.com. So if you're looking for turnkey systems to accelerate your business, start generating revenue immediately, any size, scale cultivator for any purpose or need, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you again for having me on today. Really enjoyed it and enjoyed being with all of you as well. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and look forward to following the show and seeing it continue to grow.
Just like the weed. All right. Hey, Ryan, last word. Go ahead.
Thank you guys very much for having me. I really appreciate it. I thought the panel was really dynamic today. Everyone kind of fed off each other. I thought it was real organic, pun intended. I really hope that people that want to get into the macro side of growing just realize that there's a lot of zeros to get into it. And if they do it right, there's even more zeros on the other side. It's just getting through the tough times. We've almost gone broke about 5 times, and now I'm in a really good place. So, I really appreciate you guys having me. You can find more about my cultivation company at Top Shelf Cannasaurs, CANNASEURS.com. And I'm on LinkedIn, Ryan Cohen. So hire a vet.
There you go. Absolutely. David, last word. Go ahead.
Been a great show. Tune in next week. What's our topic, Jimmy?
It's veteran
Veterans
entrepreneurs, right? What is veteran entrepreneurs, right?
Veterans in cannabis. We've got some great advocates and programs that are going on for veterans. It's going to be a great show. And I want to thank all of our guests, Ryan, Madison, Andrew, Steve, and Josh. It's great to meet
And
all.
I want to thank Isabel Turner, the producer of this. She did a great job. Dan French directs it. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Please like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you next week. Don't forget, Weed Talk. Coming up on Weed Talk News this week, lobbyists unite to urge the new president to expunge nonviolent cannabis convictions. Former NBA star Chris Webber joins an investment group to help out the social equity movement. California's Humboldt County bans outdoor hemp growing, and we can explain why on Weed Talk News next.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Weed Talk News for this week. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. Our lead story this week is all about NORML and pursuit of social justice for the cannabis community. The National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws has teamed up with the NCIA, the Minority Cannabis Business Association, and other lobbyist groups from Washington, D.C. on calling on President Joe Biden to follow up on his campaign pledge to expunge the records of nonviolent cannabis convictions. Now, after talking with Michael Correa, the lead lobbyist for the NCIA last week, no matter what happens with legalization of cannabis at the federal level, social justice will be driving the bus for legislation in Congress. This is an ongoing story that we'll be watching over the next few months for sure. And Phil Adams from Vote Pro podcast has more details on his DC report later on Weed Talk News. A related story to this has to do with the fact that one of the biggest challenges for the industry as a whole has been access to investment capital. That is especially true for those who've been most impacted on the failed war on drugs. MJ Biz Daily reports that white people own 80% of cannabis businesses in the US. Now, a former NBA player is stepping up to help out. Former Detroit Pistons star Chris Webber has teamed up with JW Asset Management to create a $100 million investment fund to help entrepreneurs who are underrepresented in the world of seed capital. Webber said, quote, "It's crucial that we diversify leadership within the cannabis industry and level the playing field for people from our communities," unquote. This is another example of many athletes in and outside the sports arena who are starting to make their voices heard about inequalities in our society. Now, let's take a time out and bring in Deborah Borchardt from the Green Market Report for a look at the markets. Deborah?
Thanks, guys. Verano Holdings began trading on the CSE this week using the symbol VRNO after closing the reverse takeover of Alternative Medical Enterprises, better known as AltMed, and sometimes referred to as AME. The stock quickly shot up from its listed price of $10 to $30, and that's in Canadian. Hexo is buying Zenabis Global in an all-stock deal valued at approximately $235 million. Zenabis had hinted that such a deal was in the making during its fight with Sundial, so it looks like Hexo is the one. Five-time NBA All-Star Chris Webber announced a partnership with Jason Wild and JW Asset Management to launch a $100 million private equity cannabis fund that is going to invest in companies led by entrepreneurs of color pursuing careers in the cannabis industry. And finally, GW Pharmaceuticals reported total revenue for the fourth quarter of $148 million. That's it for this week. I'm Deborah Borchardt from the Green Market Report for Weed Talk News.
So what's going on in California? The Golden State has really had some challenges with their new adult use laws, regulations that strangle the community, and a huge illegal community. Now, the biggest growing area in that state is called the Emerald Triangle. It's a group of counties in Northern California that has a vibrant market supplying as much as 80% of the illegal cannabis market in the US. Some have actually gone legal up there, but for the most part, law enforcement leaves that area alone since it's a battle that's been going on for decades. Now, Humboldt County has banned the growing of legal hemp cannabis because of the issue of cross-pollination between the hemp and its THC cousin that we'll call marijuana for distinction purposes. Emerald Media Group founder and CEO Christina DiGiovanni lived in Humboldt County for almost 10 years before relocating to New York. She explains why the county banned the growing of outdoor legal hemp.
The topic of hemp has been one that we've had in discussions for a long time. The concern is with the cross-pollination. It's very easy to have pollination travel from one crop to another, to cross-pollinate, to seed out other people's crops. You know, the cannabis plant with THC that blooms and buds is female, and the hemp plant is not so much female. And so when you cross the two, what do you get? You get seedy weed. And for someone who takes a lot of pride in their craft and quality cannabis, they don't want to be seeded out. So it is understandable that a place like Humboldt County that's known for their quality craft cannabis reputation may not want to have hemp cultivated there because it could potentially ruin their reputation.
You know, I can't believe that whole birds and bees thing now extends to cannabis. So not only is this county setting a precedent for banning outdoor growing of hemp, there's a bill called AB 45 that is looking to ban smokable hemp in the entire state. Never a dull moment there for sure. And never a dull moment in South Dakota, where voters approved medical and adult use of cannabis at the November election. However, their governor, Kristi Noem, is not in favor of having cannabis available for sale in her state, and she directed a circuit court judge that she appointed to rule that the ballot box initiative was unconstitutional. So now those advocates from the Marijuana Policy Project will have to take this case to their state Supreme Court. Meanwhile, in the great state of Maine, retail sales in the adult use market have doubled since its inception in the fall of 2020. There's only 15 licensed dispensaries in Maine, and they reported sales of $2.47 million in the first month of 2021. The average sale in Maine is up to $74 per consumer, up from just $66 during the first month of operations. New Jersey continues to wait for their governor, Phil Murphy, to sign the legal cannabis bill, while more than 6,000 arrests for cannabis possession have been reported. Murphy's self-imposed deadline to sign that bill is Friday, February 19th. At least New Jersey is close to launching. New York can't even get to the governor, who continues to say he wants legalization, but Andrew Cuomo now, he's being investigated for the way he handled the first few months of the pandemic, which hit New York nursing homes especially hard. Here in Massachusetts, the number of medical patients registered in that program has now passed 100,000. Over 35,000 have signed up during the pandemic, since examinations can now take place over the internet. Now, let's go to Washington, D.C. with Vote Pro podcast Phil Adams for the D.C. Report. Phil?
Hi, I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, and this is the Weed Talk News D.C. Report. A group of Washington lawmakers is calling on President Joe Biden to grant mass clemency for cannabis offenders. A letter signed by 37 members of Congress urges the White House to take a rare but not unprecedented step and issue a general pardon for all former federal nonviolent cannabis offenders. Led by Congressional Cannabis Caucus co-chairs Barbara Lee of California and Earl Blumenauer of Oregon, the lawmakers pointed to the wave of state legalizations, as well as a recent congressional action aimed at ending the federal prohibition on cannabis. Until such a bill is sent to the president's desk, the 37 signatories are calling on Biden to, quote, lead on criminal justice reform and provide immediate relief to thousands of Americans. Although Biden remains opposed to legalizing adult use, he has voiced support in the past for expungement of prior convictions and for decriminalizing cannabis. With Virginia well on the way to legalizing adult use, their neighbors across the Potomac are now considering a legalization bill of their own. This week, the Maryland House of Delegates held its first committee hearing to consider a bill to regulate adult use of cannabis and to reinvest a portion of the tax revenue in communities most impacted by the drug war. House Bill 32 calls for legalizing possession of up to 4 ounces of cannabis, as well as home cultivation for personal use. It also provides for resentencing or releasing those currently incarcerated for nonviolent cannabis convictions and for expunging prior convictions. The measure is one of 2 legalization bills before the Maryland General Assembly this year. The other is Senate Bill 708, scheduled for a Maryland Senate Finance Committee hearing on March 4th. And the District of Columbia could also see movement on long-delayed adult use sales. With a more cannabis-friendly Congress in the capital and a new regulatory agency now overseeing the DC cannabis industry, recreational cannabis sales could be getting a new lease on life. A legalization referendum that passed back in 2014 has been held up every year since then by Congress. An obscure budget rider employed by legalization opponents in Congress had prohibited the DC government from using federal tax dollars to set up an adult use marketplace. The 117th Congress now appears ready to jettison that rider. At the same time, the district's Alcoholic Beverage Regulatory Agency has taken over regulation of medical marijuana from the DC Health Department. The ABRA has taken measures to increase the number of medical marijuana patients and to ease the regulatory burden on cannabis retailers. That's the Weed Talk News DC report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
Leafly has come out with its annual cannabis jobs report, and the news is pretty impressive. There are now 321,000 full-time jobs in the legal cannabis industry in the U.S. Now think about that. There are more jobs in the cannabis industry than for electrical engineers, EMTs, paramedics, and twice as many dentists. Leafly has partnered with Whitney Economics on this jobs report since 2017. And if you can't get a job in cannabis in the US, you might want to think about going to Canada. Wait till you hear how many dispensaries are opening in Ontario. Solomon Israel from the MJ Biz Daily International Bureau has our Canadian report. Solomon?
I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily, and this is the Weed Talk News Canadian Cannabis Report. Canadian cannabis firm Hexo has announced a deal to buy another producer, Zenabis Global. The all-stock deal is worth 235 million Canadian dollars, and Hexo says the acquisition will boost its domestic and international growth. Both companies have reported significant losses in recent years. Marijuana producer Tilray lost $3 million in its fourth quarter, with revenue improving over the previous quarter. Tilray's annual loss for 2020 was $271 million, less than its annual loss in 2019. The company is due to merge with Canadian competitor Aphria this year. And Canada's biggest recreational cannabis market is once again speeding up its licensing process for marijuana stores. Ontario will now license 120 stores per month. The province already has at least 430 licensed cannabis stores open for business. You can read all those stories and more at mjbizdaily.com. I'm Solomon Israel for Marijuana Business Daily.
Here's this week's factoid, courtesy of MJ Biz Daily's Fact Book. Did you know that for every single dollar that is spent in the legal cannabis market, $2.50 gets injected into the economy? That fact and more available in the MJ Biz Daily Fact Book, available on their website, mjbizdaily.com. And finally tonight, most of the country is having a horrible winter. The state of Texas has really been hit hard with widespread electrical outages for days. The eastern seaboard is now getting hit with its most recent snowstorm that wreaked havoc all across the U.S. And now we can certainly talk about climate change, of course, that leads to these extremes in weather. But when it affects cannabis growing in Jamaica, of all places, there is real concern. Natural disasters of torrential rain followed by drought has caused a serious crop loss in Jamaica. Most of the cannabis grown, of course, in that country is outdoors, but technology might help with indoor grows. But guess what? That increases the carbon footprint. So that's another thing people who are investing millions of dollars in the economics of cultivation of cannabis in the U.S. have to consider. And that will be the theme of the Green Rush live show on Fridays. I co-host that with David Rabinovitz, and we have an all-star lineup ready for our live show on Pro Cannabis Media's social media networks and our own website. So tune in and take part in our chat room or watch it on demand. That's Weed Talk News for this week. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media, supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first. Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.